I think it's kind of bullshit that the story completes before the set is even released. Hello everybody and welcome back to another Lore After Hours rambling video. Today I'm going to be talking about the Kamigawa Neon Dynasty storyline, which there really isn't a lot to it. Once again, Wizards of the Coast returns with 5 exceptionally short story articles, 1 chapter released a day. The difference between the Kamigawa story and previous stories is that most of the previous stories were released once a week, but the Kamigawa Neon Dynasty stories were released day after day over a 5-day period, right before spoilers even began. So that is fairly interesting. I hammered them all out and recorded them quickly and released them all on the same day on my channel. So this is a review of those videos, and if you have not listened/read them yet, then I have absolutely no idea what you're doing listening to this. I still have absolutely no idea how I want to format these Lore After Hour videos. I'm still going with the scriptless option, so for now let's start with the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good. The story is an improvement. Anybody who has been a long-time viewer of my channel, or has talked to me on Twitter or on Discord, knows that I was very much not a fan of the Kaldheim and Strixhaven stories, and I was barely paying attention at all during the Zendikar Rising story. Magic's lore department has been in a it's been in a bad spot for a few years now, ever since War of the Spark, definitely, but probably as far back as the Dominaria storyline. There's been some problems with pacing, writing, what the characters are doing in the story, and as recently as the Innistrad story, that's been true for pretty much all of them. I started doing readings on this channel with Kaldheim, and then the very next set I stopped because the story was just that bad, in my opinion. The writing, the characters, and the plot itself were all just... they were of a quality that I didn't feel like I wanted to go through the effort of putting them on my channel. And after I stopped with the Strixhaven... after Strixhaven, I just stopped doing recordings. That it stayed that way for some time. But then, back in December, Wizards put out a preview story of sorts, or maybe a teaser story, for Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, detailing how Kaito got his spark and became a planeswalker. And that one had enough promise that I decided to fiddle with the idea of doing story readings for Neon Dynasty. And then I got a few requests on Twitter, in private messages, and on Discord for people to see the recordings for Neon Dynasty, so I decided, screw it, I'll go ahead and read it, and I was pleasantly surprised by the quality of the story itself. It really is a good story, and I'll start by praising the things that I liked about it most. I'm biased, obviously, but to me, some of my favorite Magic stories are the ones that are self-contained. The ones that don't need to tie into multiple sets or multiple blocks or multiple years worth of storytelling in order to get the point across. There doesn't need to be 15 or 20 different authors telling a consecutive story set after set. There's just one author telling one start-to-finish story. Those are my favorite. The Lorwyn story, the original Kamigawa story, the Kanza Tarkir story, all of those have a good beginning, middle, and end, and Neon Dynasty has that same thing. We start with Kaito and the Wanderer as kids. We see how the conflict begins with the Wanderer going missing and Tezzeret kind of causing his particular brand of nonsense on Kamigawa, and then we follow Kaito as he tries to find his friend again, and it evolves into a bigger conflict, one that's way larger than him. And yeah, there are ties to other stories. There's ties to the Gatewatch through Tamio. There's ties to Agents of Artifice through Tamio's kid. There's Tezzeret. There's Phyrexia. But the story itself, the meat and bones of the story, it's all self-contained. There's no crazy, unnecessary outside character. There's no Kaya jumping in to show Kaito the ropes and tell him how to be a planeswalker, like what was going on in Call Time. There's no introduction of unnecessary characters who spend half the story just standing around, like in Innistrad Crimson Vow, where Chandra literally spends a good whole half of the story just being present. The next thing I like is the character himself, Kaito. Kaito is the main character for this story. We follow through his point of view for most of it, and he is a flawed character, but he's flawed in a good way. He has character flaws, not writing flaws. He's not like Kaya, who Mary sues her way through the story and kills a demon that the gods of Call Time couldn't slay. No, he's flawed as a character. He's impatient. He's unwilling to wait or come up with a good plan for certain situations, and that has consequences. In fact, Tamiyo becoming a Phyrexian is almost entirely because of Kaito's impatience, and I think that's a good thing. It's a good method for telling the story. It's a good vehicle for the plot to move forward, rather than just having things happen because you need them to. There's a reason that Tamiyo became a planeswalker, and it's because Kaito attacked Tezzeret before Tamiyo was fully prepared to paralyze Tezzeret yet again, and so Tezzeret was able to make off with Tamiyo in tow, leading her to Jin Gitaxias' Iron Claws. And the relationship between the characters is kind of great too. You see this kind of tension between Kaito and Lightpaws. You see the apprehension that the Wanderer has upon finally returning to Kamigawa. She doesn't want to get too attached to Kaito, knowing that there's a risk that she'll leave again for a long period of time, and she doesn't want to open up to him and risk becoming vulnerable again. There's this kind of weird, I don't want to say student mentor, but definitely more experienced adventurer and newbie kind of dichotomy going on between Tamiyo and Kaito, where she's just kind of like, we have to do this smart, and he is completely impatient and just rushes headlong into danger. These are all great. It's nothing like what we had before, where characters were just kind of talking to each other and doing random things just to progress the plot. These felt like actual people that you were talking to, people that like actually existed, rather than just plot devices on the page. And before I move on, one more thing that I did really like about the stories is that they were easy to read. Most of my viewers aren't going to care about this, but when I'm recording these story videos, I have to kind of pace myself to the writing, and if there's a bunch of blocky, chunky paragraphs, that can be a problem for me. I run out of breath, I have to do double takes on the recordings, etc. That didn't really happen here. The writing was well paced, the paragraphs didn't run on for sentences and sentences and sentences, and everything just kind of it flowed naturally on the page, and it made it easy to record. So that was just a minor thing that I personally enjoyed a great deal. It was a nice little benefit to the story itself. I won't comment on the quality of the writing. I'm not a English major, I'm not a teacher who's going to criticize how the author wrote things, but I did enjoy the pacing of the story, if that made sense to you. And now, we get to talk about the things that I didn't like, and there is a lot. Yes, I liked the story. Yes, I liked Kaito and the Wanderer, and I liked Kaito and the Wanderer talking together, but nothing's perfect. Just like with Call Time and Strixhaven and every other story that I've just not liked, I hate the fact that there's only 5 short chapters. I'll continue to hold this belief probably for as long as Wizards continues to do this. 5 short stories, 5 short excerpts are not enough, in my opinion, for a full-blown plot. We used to have like full novels for Magic the Gathering that would take, quite a while to read through. Now we have these very short, quick tales that all 5 you can read through them quickly in like an hour or 2, I think. And it just doesn't feel like there's enough time for the story to fully develop, and sometimes it felt rushed. And even here in the story that I think is the best one we've had in well over 2 years, there was some stuff that felt rushed, especially at the very end. I I have no idea who Rizona is or what her problem was, but she just kind of attacked after a certain point of the story. She attacked the capital as, for whatever stupid reason she had. We got virtually nothing regarding characterization except that she hated the Emperor for vanishing, and that was kind of it. That was the most kind of out of left field rushed part of the plot, in my opinion. It just kind of happened. We got very little explanation at all as to what happens with Tezzeret and Jin-Gitaxias. I understand that can be more of a kind of mystery thing. We're supposed to wonder why is Jin and Tezzeret working together? Why are they doing this? But for me, it just felt like that's the kind of thing that could be elaborated on in the story, and Wizards didn't have the time to do it because the author was under such a constraint to get these 5 short stories out as fast as possible. But that's more a problem with the writing, or the size of the writing, the pacing, perhaps. I have problems with the plot, too. The first one I can think of is the backstory, when Tezzeret attacks the Wanderer as a child and somehow ignites her spark, or causes her spark to sort of ignite a weird way. How does that happen? And by that I mean, the Wanderer was with Kyodai in the Imperial Palace. And for those of you who don't know, Kyodai, previously known as That Which Was Taken, is the daughter/living heart of Okagachi. She is literally the strongest entity we've ever encountered in the Magic the Gathering story. There are very, very, very few creatures, very few beings that are on her level. When we last saw her, in fact, she was strong enough, alongside her sister Michiko, when we last saw her, she was strong enough to keep Leshrek the Nightwalker off of Kamigawa, just preventing him from returning or coming into the plane itself. She was mighty enough to repel a planeswalker back when they were gods and keep them off the plane. And it's kind of implied that she did the same to Nicol Bolas too, which, holy shit. Now, if you remember that, and you also remember that she and Michiko kill Okagachi, you have to wonder, how the fuck did Tezzeret get into the temple and attack the Emperor without immediately just being destroyed, vaporized, ripped the fuck apart by the most powerful being in the multiverse at this time, possibly? You really have to wonder, what happened there? And I understand this is one of those, kind of mystery things that is kind of necessary to gloss over for the plot, but this is kind of a big deal. This isn't a case of random thief sneaks into, a dragon's hoard. This isn't a case of Bilbo and Smaug. This is like a case of an ant sneaks into an elephant's chamber and somehow wounds the elephant. It doesn't make sense to me from a plot perspective. And then that's not the only major problem. I have issues with Kamigawa itself. Now, the story does try to fiddle with this a bit by saying that this was a particularly remote area, but we've been on Kamigawa recently in terms of the lore. We were there a short 5 or so years ago, tops. During Agents of Artifice, Jace and Baltrice and Tezzeret and Nicol Bolas are all on Kamigawa, and in that book, it's described as still being a feudal, medieval kind of plane. We're not given any indication that there's anything like hard light highways for people to walk on. There's no skyscrapers in the distance. None of that stuff exists. And the story for Neon Dynasty references the events of Agents of Artifice. In fact, it's a major plot point for Kaito to follow through on in the 2nd chapter, I believe. But it doesn't really... It's like a soft retcon, in my opinion, and I wish that Wizards would at least give an explanation as to why that was, why they felt the need to do this. And it's a problem with Wizards and their whole retcon, how willing they are to do retcons in virtually any story, and it's one that I really wish they would stop doing. If there was at least a good explanation for why this one remote village was still so feudal, I'd at least accept that, but there really wasn't anything like that. It was just kind of, we're going to gloss over that and pretend that that was, not a thing, I suppose. But that's not the biggest issue I have with the plot. Kyodai or the lack of continuity, no, those aren't the biggest issues I have with the story itself. No, I suspect that many of you will probably understand where this is about to go, because next up I want to talk about Tamiyo, more specifically Tamiyo being Phyrexianized. And this is an interesting point of the plot. You may have seen discussion about this before, where people online will say that the Planeswalker Spark makes Planeswalkers immune to Phyrexian oil. And you'll also see some people saying that that's not true. Except that that is true. That is how it operated before. For over, I want to say like 20 years now, that's been how it's been. Ever since Time Spiral, at least, that's how it's been implied. Let me explain. During the Time Spiral block, during the story of the Time Spiral block, Karn gives up his spark to fix the temporal rift above Teleria, the one that was made worse by Baren, I believe. I want to say, it's been a while since I've read the book. He gives up his spark to fix a temporal rift. And immediately the second he gives up his spark, he realizes he has Phyrexian oil in his body. And he realizes that he is suddenly vulnerable to it. And he flees. He doesn't stay on Dominaria after returning to the present. He leaves. He goes back to Mirrodin, where I don't know what he does, what he thinks he's going to do, but he succumbs to the oil. A few years later, during the events of Quest for Karn, it is the sacrifice of Venser who gives up his life to give his spark to Karn that purifies Karn of the Phyrexian oil and allows him to return to sentience. This is later referenced, I believe, during the Dominaria storyline, where they bring it up again that, hey, Venser's sacrifice, his spark, is what allows Karn to just completely shrug off the oil. So anybody online who's saying that the Planeswalker Spark doesn't provide immunity to Phyrexian oil, they are just living in complete contrast with the established lore, period. It doesn't matter who they are. If it's a WotC employee, then that just means that they're trying to retcon once again, and of course I have my own problems with that. But my problem isn't with Planeswalkers becoming Phyrexianized now, and it's going to be a thing. We're going to see more of them. Almost guaranteed. We are going to see more Phyrexian Planeswalkers in future sets. It's going to happen. The new Phyrexian mana mechanic attached to Tamiyo is explicitly in mentioning loyalty counters, so I can almost guarantee that that is going to be a Phyrexian Planeswalker thing going forward. No, I'm not bothered all that much by Planeswalkers becoming Phyrexians, despite how snarling that is to lore, because Wizards could easily explain it by saying that Jin-Gitaxias has found a new method to overcome the immunity that the spark provides. That's a totally real thing that they could do. They could just say, yo, he found a new method that works, despite Elesh Norn snarling and saying, no, that could never possibly happen. My problem, my complaint with it is that it's a weird stakes to have, in my opinion. And I suppose that I'll be really bad at explaining what I mean here, but when something like this happens, it's usually meant to raise the stakes, to show that the characters are themselves corruptible and at risk of being turned into the thing they fight against. But especially here, it feels like the kind of thing where it's not going to have long-term consequences. I have this really sinking suspicion that this will go on to become a larger plot point in the future, where more Planeswalkers will become Phyrexians, and the heroes of the story, whoever that turns out to be, will have to find a way to undo that and to turn them back to normal. And if that's the case, then I really have to ask the question of, was this necessary? Was this particular plot point necessary? Phyrexia was already a major problem, just in and of itself, even without interplanar travel, even without Phyrexian Planeswalkers. Phyrexia is still a problem. It's still a death world that needs to be put out of its misery, so raising the stakes even further, adding Phyrexianized Tamio, or possibly Tybalt, or my boy Koth down the road, we're almost guaranteed, he's almost guaranteed to be a Phyrexian at this point. Oh, I'm so upset. Raising the stakes like this, and it's not killing the characters off. It's not the same as like Game of Thrones where they killed a character off just for the shock factor, but it feels like it. This is Tamio becoming a Phyrexian for shock value. That's it. I'm sorry that I'm very bad at expressing how I feel about this kind of thing. Again, I'm not a reviewer, but that's what this feels like. It feels like this was done for shock factor rather than actual progression of the plot. Because I feel that this is the kind of thing that can be undone. Corrupting Tamio into a Phyrexian, I think, can be undone, and they will eventually get around to doing it. I might be wrong, and I'll be, shocked, but this feels like it was a shock factor thing. Something done to increase audience interaction. And it certainly worked. If you go to Twitter, if you go to Reddit, if you go to 4chan, if you go to Discord, everyone was talking about Tamio becoming a Phyrexian. It was a huge deal for a bit. There's fan art, there's all kinds of discussions. It was nuts. So it definitely worked. It was definitely a shock factor that worked, and I feel like they're going to do it again. And it's going to be less effective. Either because it will be on a character nobody gives a shit about, like Tybalt, or because it'll already kind of wear off the interest, which is what I'm afraid of it's going to happen. I don't like when stakes are raised like this. I think there was a better way that WotC could have made Phyrexia more threatening. Just the ability to travel through the plains was already a problem. Phyrexian oil is no joke. It's really, really difficult to fight off. If there's even a drop of it on your plane, you have to completely eradicate every last bit of it in order to be free of the Phyrexian scourge, and that alone was a big problem. Adding in Phyrexian planeswalkers and raising the stakes just felt unnecessary to me. So there's that. And then the final, I promise, complaint I have towards the set is that Kamigawa Neon Dynasty was kind of advertised as a Kamigawa goes cyberpunk setting, and it failed to deliver entirely, in my opinion. That's not to say that it's not, cyber, shiny, retro, futuristic. There's plenty of neon lights and robots and all kinds of futuristic crap, but there's none of the cyberpunk aesthetic to it. And by that I'm talking about, the core values of a cyberpunk story are always about human nature and mega corporations versus transhumanism, and the aspect of the soul versus do you have a soul? If you're a machine, how much of your body can become artificial before you lose your soul? That kind of thing. None of that is present here. There's a bit of talk in the story about, regulations for certain kinds of technology, but there's never any kind of discussion about the kind of things you would see in a cyberpunk story. There's none of that transhumanistic stuff really going on in the plot itself. There's a bit of it in the cards, there's a bit of reference to it in the cards, but there's really nothing like that in the plot, and I feel like that was a huge miss on Wizards' part. They took the look of cyberpunk with none of the theme of cyberpunk, and in my opinion, that, I don't want to call it disingenuous, but it felt like a slap in the face to people like me who are fans of cyberpunk media. I love cyberpunk stuff. Ghost in the Shell especially is one of my all-time favorite anime movies. And to see this set call itself cyberpunk and to have none of the themes of a cyberpunk universe just kind of felt off. It was like if Wizards released a Western set and there were no guns, none of that lawlessness stuff. It would have the same effect on me, I think. It would just feel weird. And so I've rambled on for a bit. Overall, I think that the story for Kamigawa Neon Dynasty is a massive, massive improvement over what we've gotten recently. It's definitely, in my opinion, the best story we've gotten in 2 years, and I can say that now includes the comics, because only a few days after I decided that the comics were great, I learned that Wizards declared them non-canon, so I'm super upset about that. So yeah, Kamigawa Neon Dynasty is the best canon story we've gotten in over 2 years, I think. It has many flaws. There's many things that I don't like about it, but I was glad that I read it. I'm glad that I put it on the channel. I'm glad that the viewers of my channel enjoy it. And as always, I'm looking forward to what Wizards puts out next. And I am hoping, optimistically, but, expecting the worst, that I'll enjoy it. Thank you for listening. Have a great day, and I will see you next time.